the Standards Committee meeting. If anyone has an electronic device, either turn it off or put it on mute to avoid feedback. I think the bucket of water is still by the door if it goes off. Good. Any remote? I can't see anyone on there. The meeting may be recorded depending on the quality, and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. So I've welcomed you all. Welcome the independent person in attendance, Patricia Richards. Welcome. The following staff are in physical attendance: Monitoring Officer Robin Harris, Democratic Services Billy Attaway, Democratic and Electoral Services Apprentice Alona Diachenko. There is no planned evacuation, so if the alarm sounds, do the airline thing, don't use the lifts. Does anyone need any help? I will make sure you're okay. That's what I thought. Nobody else does. Are there any apologies for absence and confirmation of substitutes?
Thank you, Chair. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Richard Palmer, who is substituted by Councillor Peter MacDonald. The independent person, Christopher Webb, can't make it, and Councillor Richard Lehman.
Okay,
and one more, sorry. Councillor Nundy's running late. He's going to try and be here, but I suspect we might be done by the time he appears.
Oh, we'll do our best.
Yeah.
If I'm looking the wrong way, just flash and then I'll say, right, thank you. Good night.
Councillor Pete Neal was just about to finish work when he got called up to London, so he won't be here, unfortunately.
Make it. Okay. Right. Are you happy that I sign the minutes of the 17th of February and the 14th of May as a correct record? Okay. Item 4, declarations of interest. Anyone? No? Good. Item 5. Item 5, update on the members' DBS checks. Is that Billy? Have you got anything to update?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The only update from the Appendix 1 in the report pack is that we've had one additional DBS check from Labour, Conservatives and Lib Dems since it was published.
Well done. Councillor Bonney?
I've asked my group members and those that have come back to me, so we should have 5 out of 8. So I don't understand why the numbers are so low on our group when I know at least 5 of them have.
They might have done it, but we haven't received it.
They've emailed it.
All right. Well, we can ask them to email it
Yeah,
again.
I can give you names, but I won't. I'll come talk to you afterwards.
All right. Yeah.
Good. Well, we're getting there. I mean, members, this has been going on for quite a considerable amount of time. It has been through council that this should be done. It's policy now, and we really need to put pressure on our members who haven't done it. If we know that there is a member who, I will not be doing it, I don't care what you say, fair enough. At least you know. I do not have a problem naming and shaming anybody, including my own group. And I think if we haven't got either I'm never going to do one or here's my number by the next meeting, then I think that we should be naming and shaming people. What do you think? Good. Well, just make sure you feed that back.
Do you want to propose a recommendation which could be seconded and voted on at the next meeting of the committee, which will be in September? We'll name people who haven't done a DBS check. Then we then bring a report with, rather than this one, which was just effectively numbers as names.
Yeah, that's good then. Okay, so I'll propose, if I'll need a seconder, that the September meeting we'll have a list of those members who have not submitted either, well, they shouldn't have submitted a copy. They should submit the number of their DBS check. And if they haven't done it by the September meeting, they will be named. Do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Last, thank you. Okay, any comment on that?
Yep. It's actually not your number, it's a code so that Democratic Services can see it. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah.
The code, yeah. Okay, all agreed? Right, that's unanimous. Thank you, members. The next one then is... I did used to have these multifocal things, but I could not get on with them. 6, forward decisions plan. Myself and the Vice Chairman went through all the things that had been outstanding, all the things that had come up the previous year that we felt there were things that needed to be finished off, and came up with what's there on the list. Number 1, are you happy with it? And number 2, is there anything else that you think should be on that list? Councillor Perkin.
Yeah, I'm happy with the forward plan. I just wonder whether we need to just have a bit of a watching brief on the legislation changes around standards, and the response to the government has done a consultation, so there should be a reply to that at some point fairly soon.
Later item on that, so in the agenda.
That's what I thought.
7,
Yeah.
Item 7 on the agenda is about that.
And don't forget, members, that you did agree at this committee in the last civic year that at the end of each Standards Committee meeting, the chair, man or woman, the chairman will write to the relevant minister, chivying him up on the new scheme. And I know you agreed it at the Standards Committee meeting because I substituted that night and I proposed it. It's called Gutta Cavit Lapidem. Water dripping on a stone makes a hole. Yes. Okay, right, good. So we're happy with that. Okay, then the next one is item 7, which is the complaints received over the last 3 months, verbal update from Robin.
So in actual fact, just to brief members, we discussed whether or not it would be sensible to bring a verbal update to every Standards Committee meeting in order to consider whether or not there were matters that were going to be coming to potential future Standards Committee panels. However, we felt that there was possibly a risk that if we were to do that, we might actually prejudice any investigation that was going on in relation to those matters. So instead, I think there's a slight change of direction in relation to this verbal update, which is in relation to how we might appropriately report to the Standards Committee the complaints that have been dealt with during the course of a particular civic year. And saying historically there's been a report at the end of towards the end of the year, but obviously then that's a bit of an odd timing for the report because you haven't actually then had all of the complaints during the course of the year, so you end up with the complaints that go over 1 year and do they then get included in the next year. So actually how we've potentially dealt with that in relation to the previous item, which is the forward plan, is that we've suggested that in actual fact an annual report on complaints, which would be part of the annual monitoring officer report, comes to the March committee meeting and would deal with the previous calendar year of complaints, and that then the committee would have the review of that in March. So that is the verbal update, unless there are any questions.
Yeah, thanks. I think anyone who follows this and without having gone and listened to the recording will have no idea what's in that subject. So I think a verbal update isn't really very helpful in terms of also tracking what's happened, and having it in a year basis. Well, I mean, how many complaints do we get roughly on average a year?
It is incredibly variable because in some years you get literally a handful of complaints all year, and in other years when particular things happen, you get into the dozens of complaints. So it isn't an easy average to come to, because there are years which have an excessive number of complaints due to specific individual unique things that happened, which then give an entirely an unhelpful view of what the average would look like. So it's not easy to say how many there are, but by way of a potential suggestion, and looking down the road at what our colleagues do, Maidstone have a complaints report come twice a year, so obviously once every 6 months, so you can be understanding where you are at, if you like, at the halfway point during the year. So I think actually, so would have come around about this time, say, or perhaps at the next meeting, so you could be September and March, so you'd be updated as to the year's figures.
But how many meetings do they have a year as a committee?
Well, there is a slight difference there in relation to Maidstone don't have a standards committee as a standalone committee. Maidstone has audit, governance and standards. So obviously that meets quite frequently, because obviously it has the audit function as well as the standards function and a generic governance function as well. But I think we were looking at quarterly meetings for this committee, and so say there was potentially an original suggestion about just having a verbal update on complaints 3 monthly, but actually I think the chair ultimately agreed when we discussed it prior to this meeting that wasn't the best way to approach it. So I think obviously you've also said you didn't think the verbal update for it would be very helpful. So what's been suggested as a starting point is there should be an annual report which comes to this meeting and the timing of that report. And then obviously, so I've suggested that if you wanted more than that, well then you could look at, as I say, 6th monthly or yearly. I personally think quarterly. We don't have sufficient complaints on what, if you can call an ordinary year, to merit bringing a written report every 3 months into what the situation is with complaints, which is probably a good thing.
So as a committee member, we only meet how many times a year? 4. So if we have an annual report, we've basically got 3 opportunities before the next one comes along. So that doesn't seem a very satisfactory way of monitoring it. And I think, if you have a yearly one, you might need you need something in between, and you need a simple table. And if it's not very much on it, there's not very much on it. But if it's more than that, then at least we've got a trail we can look back on for the members, but anyone also observing this, because it's too late by the end of the year. You can't do anything about it. So I think, if we're supposed to be having oversight and understanding what's going on, if you have a once a year, well, you wait till your next quarterly meeting to try and resolve something, and then into a halfway point for the year. It's a problem when you don't meet frequently enough, is that you're then hampered on your ability to properly oversee, is my view. So I think we need quarterly, but I suggest that it's a really simple table of some form so we can keep a tracker on it.
Mark and then James.
Yeah, what I was just going to say really is I do think we need to have a running total so we know how many complaints there have been every 3 months, as well as what areas the complaints are in, and keep that running total so we as a standards committee can see if there is an area of issue and if we need to look further into that area of issue. So I do think we need a rolling total. Once a year won't be satisfactory in my book, because you're just going to get the grand total of X number of complaints in this area. Whereas if we do it on a 3 monthly, we can see certain areas may become more prominent than others, rather than just being given a number at the end of the year. So basically what I'm saying is a 3 monthly report, verbals are fine, but the number of incidents in those 3 months, what areas they are, and then obviously that would be added into a rolling total so that in 6 months there will be X number of incidents in that 3 months, these areas, and the rolling total is. Just a simple verbal report like that.
James. James.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree it should be more than annual, especially so because if there's a particular thing that we see as a standards committee that we then want to say that we want to look at in more detail, having it once a year, we could be then saying, well, we need a bit more time in that 3 months. It'd be another 6 months before we see it. So you could be looking at over a year from an issue to us actually being and looking at the detail. So it definitely does need more. But also I just wonder, I think if there is a big issue, we use the bins for an example, because I think it's probably a good one. You get a lot of complaints, but it could be broken down a bit more into a certain issue, say bin issues, however many complaints there is, and then the detail for it. It doesn't have to be so much information that it's every single complaint. And I think the other thing I was going to say, just to have an idea of how officers deal with it, because obviously this is something, complaints is looked at all the time, and I assume that officers are dealing with these things I'm talking about departments. If there's a complaint within a department, how is it dealt with on an officer level on side? Is this something that's looked at and considered monthly, annually, half yearly? Because that would be good to know, just how that's dealt with how we would deal with it.
Right, before Robin comes in, Mark wants to come back.
Yeah.
I'll take Robin.
Yeah, I was just going to add, also, I was going to say that a year may be too late, because we won't know if there's been major instances that we need to look at. So at least if we're getting a rolling total, we get some idea of whether there is a serious incident that we need to look at. A year afterwards would be too late.
And I'm struggling here. I'm usually pretty good on long term, but who did we replace? Local government, something or other. And I'm pretty sure that we had That's it, yeah. I'm pretty sure, it's one of the few things I used to read, that we used to get a regular, indeed I think we had a monthly bulletin telling us the latest, and now and if there was anything pertinent, we'd also have case studies, several case studies. They were worth more than gold in terms of, oh, right, don't do that. Yeah. So there's something out there that my concern, when James and I spoke to Robin on complaints, apart from anything else, I happen to know that the licensing subcommittee, i.e. the licensing hearings, it's the same few members that are that are sitting on every single hearing, because number one, you've got to be properly trained, but number two, they'll always meet during the day, and there's a very small number of councillors that are in the pool to do that licensing subcommittee hearings. And I was trying to establish what sort of volume of business there might be for members of this committee to have to sit on hearings. But without telling you, without prejudging things, it was very difficult, which is why Robin came up with his annual report. Anyway, over to you, Robin.
So yeah, that's very helpful, actually, feedback and input from members. And I think there's a degree of it where we're slightly at cross purposes, because when I'm talking about doing an annual report, I would be talking about a sort of a slightly deeper dive in relation to, lessons that may have been learned, and, being able to go into potentially some specifics of cases whereby matters had been determined and there were steps that could be taken. Whereas I think what I'm actually hearing from members, and I'm sure members would benefit from that the starting point is in relation to quarterly. They would just like to some extent an idea of the frequency of events, and so it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to do that sort of report quarterly, because a matter which has only arisen in that quarter, particularly if it was going to go to a hearing or an investigation, would not have been heard. So I think that potentially we may be on much the same page, whereby very happy to do a quarterly, and hearing what Councillor Bonney said, written report in relation to the frequency of complaints, i.e. how many parish complaints, how many borough complaints, and just the generic, what is the area of the complaint? Is it, for example, social media, which is of course a very common one, or is it something different? Was it something that happened in a meeting? So that, as you say, you have the general sense of the volume of complaints and the frequency in which complaints are made, and what the workflow is that's being dealt with. And then, as I say, potentially annually or twice annually, depending on what you would wish, then that deeper dive into it in relation to things that whether they were investigated, whether they went to hearing, lessons learned, things that could be improved, which is perhaps better done with the benefit of hindsight and is almost impossible to do contemporaneously.
Somebody want to make a proposal?
I was going to say, in fairness, we don't really need, because this is not a verbal update, but I'm happy to basically, if we just get the general consensus of what members in the room are happy with, then obviously we will do what members in the room are after. So there's, I say, an informal proposal from myself, say a quarterly update in relation to frequency, and an annual report, I think, is possibly a good way of dealing with it, if people are happy with that.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. I think there was just some mention in the discussion about kind of service complaints, and that's not really what Standards Committee is about.
I think actually what Councillor Hunt was after is the comparator of how we deal with things from the point of view of officer disciplinary proceedings. So in actual fact, those are not widely reported, because obviously the employment relationship doesn't permit wide reporting of that kind of thing. Those kind of things are sensitive. So I think I have seen a report go to EMT, which as a section of a general report on HR covers that sort of thing, but it's not the same as what we're talking about here. And thank you for the reminder, because I intended to address that and I forgot.
So are we happy with that as a way forward? I would also suggest that there could be a training need coming out of it. Either we agree to notify CALC that, your parish councillors need some training in X or Y or Z, or SBC, Member Development Group, your members need training in A, B, C, D, E, F, G. It's always useful if there is a theme. So we're all agreed with that? Yeah, good. Thank you. And the next one then, which is the last one. Oh, you're doing so well here. We'll definitely get to Aldi. Code of conduct arrangements, verbal update from Robin.
So again, a couple of points in relation to this, which is that this committee was previously working on a potentially new set of arrangements for how we conduct standards investigations and complaints and hearings, basically an overall package for how you deal with the process from the very beginning of the process to the very end of the process, which is would hopefully be an improvement on our current system, whereby we have a fairly clear set of rules how we deal with things at the beginning of the process, and we have a fairly clear set of rules in relation to how we deal with hearings, but the bit in the middle is, I think we would all reasonably agree, somewhat deficient. We paused that work quite sensibly because the government was making a lot of noise about standards arrangements, and we all, in fact, this committee also contributed and agonised over the appropriate council responses to the public consultation, which completed in February this year. Unfortunately, since that time, it has gone rather quiet, and there was some rumour and suggestion that the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill might be a place where they might bring forward standards as a place where they're also bringing forward such things as cabinet models being, a requirement, and the way, the method of voting, and that standards might have been in there as well, but it isn't. And so on that basis, and in the absence of any real substantive update from the government on arrangements, I wanted really to use this opportunity to ask the committee if at this point we should assume that this is not going to be something that we're going to get from the government in short order, and that we should restart our own work on our own arrangements for standards, which we're actually at a almost complete stage, I'd suggest, when we actually called a halt to it, and bring a paper to the September committee, which would obviously then go on the forward plan to start our work, not start our work, but actually to review our work on the arrangements that we got to, and hopefully then adopt a new set of arrangements, such as was our original intention when we started. Thank you.
Ashley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think we should move forward on that. If something then happens in the meantime, then obviously that's just hard luck, I suppose, that we'll have put a bit more work into things. But I do agree that we were almost there, and it had been circulated round. There were various iterations and comments, and I thought that it did become quite clear that, particularly if a member was facing a hearing, having the clarity in our arrangements that was being sought by those would just be helpful, not just for those who are sitting on the panels, but for somebody if you were to be called to a hearing. And I just think it's a fairer, it's fair on everybody then that this is sort of cleared up. I just wonder whether we could sort of have the information ahead of that meeting, whilst obviously I'll have a report and something that we can comment on, just so that we can sort of re-familiarise ourselves, because I have to say a bit of distance from then means that I can't even quite remember everything that was discussed about that. But I do know that there was quite a lot of really helpful feedback, and it was really helpful for us to see what other places had in their arrangements, and it was quite clear that we had stuff that I thought was quite good in ours, but actually I thought ours fell well short in a number of other ways, and actually hearings in particular would run a lot more smoothly with the changes that were being considered by members at that time. Thank you.
Robin, then nobody else wants to say anything.
Just by way of suggestion, perhaps as almost an informal piece post this meeting, if I share the most recent report that the committee had and the most recent iteration of the arrangements, and then if anyone wanted to make any comments on that prior to then doing a report and the arrangements formally for the next meeting in September, then there'd be an opportunity to say for people to refresh themselves on how far we'd got previously, because I thought actually yes, we were almost there, to be honest with you, and that, yeah, so we wouldn't be sensible necessarily to start from scratch. So actually if we refresh our corporate memory, as it were, on what we did towards the end of the previous year, the calendar year, before we paused it, then that would seem to be an entirely sensible and reasonable thing to do. And then obviously the members of the committee can get comments in early, and we can then address that and hopefully get a set of arrangements, possibly even at the end of the September meeting, that we could recommend to council. Yeah.
Okay, nods all around, so we'll go with that. Okay, any other comments, members? Speak now or forever hold your peace. According to my watch, it's 7:27 and 25 seconds. Thank you for your attendance, and I declare the meeting closed.